Michelle Weber!
Hi, guys. The name of my story is Pushy Broad. Time waits for no man or woman. There is less of it than you think. 5 years ago, I had 5 heart surgeries. Now, you wouldn't know by looking at my agile frame, but I did. Now, time had a different importance to me then, and I found myself looking back at some parts of my life. Now, don't worry, this isn't a heart surgery survivor story. Relax, man, it's about AIDS in the late 80s, and that's way funnier! One of the events in my life that I noted when I was feeling gratitude for every minute I lived is as follows. In August of 1987, where probably many of you hadn't been born yet, I was living in Berkeley, California. Now, I know it's hard to tell by looking at me that I ever lived in Berkeley, but I did. I had just left a huge job directing mental health programs for children and adolescents. Why did I leave, you may ask, but even if you don't, I'm going to tell you. My boss was getting too close to my face. He would ask all his female staff if they had gotten laid the night before and how big their boyfriends' dicks were. It was time for me to leave. So I got out of there. I said adios. It was before Anita Hill, unfortunately, or I would have creamed his ass. But okay. So my plan was to move back to the East Coast in about 10 months because my daughter would be graduating high school, going on to college that following June. So I was ready to move back east for medical reasons that, while fascinating, as all people talking about their ailments are, will be omitted for the purposes of this story. I was staying in Berkeley until my kid graduated and I had time on my hands. I decided to do some volunteer work. It's no good for me to have time on my hands. When I have unfulfilled time, things happen like I flirt with the security guards at Park La Brea where I live. They all get in trouble except me. So I realized not good to have time on my hands. So I saw that the AIDS Project of the East Bay in Oakland was looking for people to give a day or two a week, and I called and I offered my time. It seemed more up my alley than plant a tree, build a playground, and far less about digging or welding or getting dirty or sunburned. Talk I can do, dig I'm not so good at. I am a psychotherapist and an addiction specialist, which never ceases to surprise everyone I tell. Additionally, I had directed a center on death and dying at Yale and could be available to help people cope with grief and loss. Yale. I wasn't sure you heard that the first time, so I felt it necessary to repeat. Yale. Like you wouldn't repeat it, right? Come on. Okay, so in 1987, we had very little idea about this virus and how it impacted people who were diagnosed with the disease. So I was expected to go through an intensive 3-day training before I began working with any of the clients. The training began with a panel composed of 3 young men who were diagnosed with HIV. Each told their story to a group of about 100 of us. We were all volunteers. These stories were difficult to hear, and you could feel sorrow permeate the auditorium. There was an enormous amount of sympathy and empathy and an outpouring of support and kindness, and then Richard spoke. Richard, one of the guys on the panel, was really angry. He proclaimed that he was not gay, as many of the guys in the program were. He was better than that. And he insisted proudly that he had contracted the disease by sleeping with prostitutes. The more he spoke, the angrier and more adamant he became. He felt sure that once he made it clear that he didn't wave a rainbow flag or go-go dance on a bar in a jockstrap, people would realize that he did not deserve this disease, implying like the homos did. Yeah, Richard, we got it. We got it, Richard. Okay. So the training ended, and several days later, I got a call from the clinical director with the name of my first client, and I was psyched. It was Richard. Like a professional and a true compassionate woman, I said, no, no, that's it. I'm not going to do it. There's no way I'm going to do it. He's rude, he's angry, he's a sexist pig. I'm not going to do it. She did not argue with me. But she went on to say, please, Michelle, he really needs a strong woman. Well, I'm not immune to flattery. I mean, if you call me strong, I'm going to stop and I'm going to think about it. So I took a breath and I said, no, no. N-O spells no. I'm not going to do it. Absolutely not. It's not going to happen. But then I stopped and I thought to myself, here I had volunteered my services, but I was refusing to see the first client that had been referred to me. Like a true compassionate person that I am, an angel, really. I know it's hard to see how kind I am by looking at me, but I am. So I stopped, I took a breath, I took a look at myself. Okay, I said, I would agree to see him only in order to determine if we could work together, nothing more. I wasn't going to commit to someone I couldn't help, and I couldn't help him if every time he opened his goddamn mouth, I wanted to stuff duct tape in it and string him up by his balls. No. Okay. So, when I told the clinical director, Diane, that I would be willing to see him, little did I know that he had refused to see me because he said I was a pushy broad. And he did not like pushy people. So loudmouth Richard, who was claiming superiority over gays by proudly announcing his love for hookers, said I was too pushy? What? Oh, please. The director then informed me that there had been some incidences of domestic violence as well. Terrific, I said. When can I start? And what the fuck was I getting myself into? Okay, a couple of more breaths. I called him. We made arrangements to meet in a few days at a restaurant in Berkeley. Now, you know how these stories go. When we met, we clicked immediately. Of course! I walked into the restaurant and saw that he was dressed in a suit and a tie, and he pulled out my chair for me. The gay-bashing John with the anger issues and the dislike for pushy people pulled out my chair for me. Take note of that, guys, will you please? I mean, seriously. Okay. I'm a feminist with contradictions. Okay, so he was calm and kind, and I was open and compassionate. And something lovely happened. We forgot our prejudice, and we were able to connect. We continued to meet a few times a week throughout the year. The few months I had planned to volunteer stretched well into 10 months. We spoke every day. When he needed a laugh, he called me. When his estranged wife came over to his house, he called me. And I told him to leave immediately, because if he didn't, when he called me from the police department, I was not going to bail him out. Too much bullshit was going on between them. When he went in for his treatment, which in those days meant up to a week in the hospital, he called me every day, sometimes several times a day. You see, in those days, AIDS was a death sentence. AZT was on a lottery, and guys all around me were disappearing in the wink of an eye. But Richard kept going. The stripper-loving Energizer bunny with a pocket full of ones. One time, the clinical director was running a group that he was in, and she called me to tell me that everyone was complaining about their therapist except Richard, who said, you needed to have a therapist like Michelle, who calls you a dickhead when you are a dickhead. Now, I know it's hard to tell from this essay I could call anyone a dickhead, but I can't. Diane recalled that Richard was smiling like a Cheshire cat and acting proud when he spoke about his therapist, me. When Christmas came, I received a card from him which said, to a pushy broad from a sexist pig. We had shared our concerns about each other way early on. In it, he wrote that he was determined to live through 1988 because of the work we had done together. He was determined to have more time. In the card, he told me how grateful he was to have met me. Best Christmas present ever. We worked together until June of 1988. At the end of June, the panel convened one last time. Each guy was asked what was the best thing that had happened to him this year. And Richard didn't actually offend a single person that day. It was a proud moment. He told the panel that the best thing for him had been having Michelle for a therapist, who got me to look inside myself and deal with my feelings. Discovering Richard's feelings is one of my highest achievements. I wish they gave out diplomas for that. I would have an RHD, Richard has depth. And I would display it, you ready for this? Right next to my diploma from Yale. I mentioned Yale, right? Yale? Yeah, Yale, okay. So, he and I said goodbye a few weeks later. He left for Arizona, I left for the East Coast. He continued to call me every Sunday. As the weeks went by, he became weaker and weaker, and he had become really ill. One Sunday morning, his voice was so weak that I could hardly hear him. He told me that he was really tired, and he didn't want to hold on anymore. I told him that if he wanted to, he could let go. He thanked me, we said goodbye. His girlfriend called me a few days later to tell me that he had died, and that right before he passed, he told her to make sure to call me and thank me for all that I had done for him. And you know what, guys? A week later, I changed my license plate to Pushy Broad. And I dedicated it to Richard, a man who helped me open my eyes to acceptance and love, a man who reminded me that everybody has feelings, a man who put a spotlight on time and how precious it is and how short it is and how there is only this minute, and it is as good a minute or as bad a minute, as hard or as compassionate, as loud and pushy, or as quiet and still as you decide this minute is going to be. Time waits for no man or woman. Don't wait until you have a life-threatening disease or need heart surgery to appreciate the time you have. It doesn't matter how much you have, it's what you do with it. Be kind, be compassionate, be here now. I know you wouldn't know by looking at me that I'm such a fucking softie, but I am. Now I'm done, and I'm gonna sit down, and I just wanted to thank every dickhead in this audience.